Thank you for joining me in my garden today. I'm Liz Davey, and you're watching A Walk in the Garden on NCTV, Norfolk's community cable station. I'm in my herb garden, and suddenly it's fall. Seems like summer just disappeared overnight. We're having some cooler temperatures at night now, at least for a while, but we'll have plenty of warm days as fall wears on. I'm in the herb garden, and this year it's still pretty green and a lot of herbs can be used. We've had so much rain this summer in our area, and it's kept everything green, including the weeds. So I've been busy weeding, and now I'm thinking about preparing for fall. And one of the things I'm doing is picking and drying herbs and getting ready to make some cuttings of some of the ones that I want to keep, and that would include things like this nutmeg geranium. It won't last through a frost, but I can take cuttings and bring them inside and have plants for next year. I also have a peppermint geranium to bring in. I can also pot up some of the herbs and bring them in, like this rosemary. It's a small rosemary. I've been using it, taking pieces off, and I will dig that up and put it in a pot. Rosemary will stay alive and growing until about 20 degrees, so I'm not in a real big hurry on that one. And I will, after I pot it up, just leave it out in the garden so it can kind of get acclimated. Rosemary's a hard one to keep inside. It just doesn't seem to make it through spring many years. Occasionally I've been able to, and we'll talk a little more about that when we do bring it inside. The other thing I purchased this year was a bay plant. These are the bay leaves that you would buy in the store to add to your stew or soup, and this one is alive, and it's been putting on new growth and doing really well. I kept it in the pot so it would be easier to move inside, and I'll put that in a sunny area inside and try to keep it through the winter. But first it's going to get a good washing before it goes inside, as are all the plants that are outside coming in, because I don't want to bring in any wildlife with it in the way of little insects. I have plenty of time to pick this year. Winter savory, lemon balm, and particularly sage, which I do like to dry to use throughout the winter. Also, tarragon is still very much going and ready to be harvested. And that too can be dried. What I'm standing in is a bed of oregano, and I've already picked quite a lot of that and dried it, enough to have for the winter. It's nice to turn over your herbs and spices every year, and I try to do that by drying some of the ones I use the most and replacing any that I have in storage. Now let's move over to the perennial garden and see what's happening over there. Fall is also a time for lessons learned and notes to be made about things you'd like to do a little differently next year. One of the things that happened this year is I did not prune my grape. It overgrew with all the rain particularly, and though I had a lot of grapes set fruit, they have not matured well. What with all the rain and fungal problems, it was just too crowded to make good grapes. So I will definitely be pruning the grape back quite a bit next spring, and hopefully we'll have a little better luck getting some good grapes. Right now what we have left, the birds and squirrels have been enjoying greatly. Other things to look out for are plants that you might want to add next year to your garden where you need a little extra color during certain seasons, and things that you might want to take out or move. Moving in fall is often recommended if you have the space. I prefer to do my digging and moving around in spring. Somehow it just suits my gardening better. But fall is also a good time to do it. I have a foxglove here which will have a tall bloom. Rightfully, it should be in the back of the garden. So that one I may move this fall to see if we can keep it going and have blooms next spring. Foxgloves are called biennials, meaning they grow foliage the first year and bloom the second year. So this one hopefully will bloom next year. Right now I have a plant called Boltonia. You might think it's an aster, but it's really another aster-like plant called Boltonia. It stands up pretty straight and has these white daisy-like blooms. I've put in a few annuals in the garden in pots. These will be coming inside to be stored away for the winter. This is a pineapple lily. It's getting pretty, actually moth-eaten looking, so it's time to probably move this into an area where it can be left to lose its foliage and then come inside for the winter. It is a bulb that's in the pot, and it is a tender bulb that would be perennial only in areas like Florida or maybe Georgia. I trimmed back some of the daylilies. They rewarded me because of all the rain we've had with nice new foliage. And they probably won't bloom anymore this season, but at least the foliage looks a little nicer than what was there. Some of the annuals that I have in this garden are Cleome, and it's making seed pods. And I can either save these seeds to be replanted. There's plenty of them here. In fact, I'm going to hold on to these and put them into a cup. Or it's going to seed right here, and I'll have the same plants growing here next year. But some of these pods are already starting to open, and I'll hold on to it for a minute until I get down to a container for them. This is a plant called Eupatorium chocolate. The chocolate name comes from its dark foliage, and it's going to have some nice white blooms as well. It's all budded and it blooms in the fall. There are grasses and canna lilies in the back. The grasses have already put on some plumes. Canna lilies may or may not bloom. It looks like we're going to have a couple blooms back there. Again, having some rain has helped those a great deal. I have asters that are about to bloom. And again, these are pink dome aster, and you can just see the pink color starting to come through in an occasional bloom here and there where they've opened up. This will be covered with pink in about another week. I have some goldenrod. Goldenrod is not what causes the allergies. That would be ragweed. The reason goldenrod doesn't cause allergies is because it is not pollinated by the wind. It's pollinated by insects. And so there isn't pollen flying around from the goldenrod. But the insignificant blooming ragweed is in bloom at the same time. And it's the one that's wind pollinated and causes great allergy problems for many people. But ragweed has gotten a bad press because it blooms at the same time and is much showier. I'm going to come down this way, and I've put in a few chrysanthemums here and there, still in their pots. Though they're called hardy mums, they're not when you buy them in the fall. These will be composted when they're done blooming. They will not come back if you plant them. Perhaps if you got them in the ground in July, you could get another year or so out of them. But if you really want mums to come back, you need to plant them in April or May when they're very small. And usually those are only available through mail order sources. The ones in the fall are great to have around for filling in spaces, but they just don't last, unfortunately. So I think of them as an annual. I use plastic cups to keep seeds, and we're going to put those Cleome seeds in one of these cups. I'll label it with a piece of masking tape and bring it inside, and when I'm sure they're good and dry, I'll put those in an envelope to keep just plant next year. When it comes to things like this butterfly weed, which is also going to seed, and you can see this one has plumes that fly, and those I'll put in a paper bag. Otherwise, if I put them in the cup, they would just fly away. And the seeds are attached to the fuzzy pieces that fly around and spread the seed of the butterfly weed. This has the orange blooms earlier in the season, and some of these are already opened. Others are just opening. And if you can get one that's dry but hasn't quite opened, then you get the seeds without as much of the fluff. I keep the fluff and the seeds. The seeds will shake out to the bottom of the bag ultimately, and the fluff can be put out in the spring for birds to line their nests with. Speaking of birds, it's time now. They're finished nesting in our area for the season, so you can clean out bird houses and remove them and save them for spring if you take them down, or just clear them. It's probably a good idea to wear your mask and your gloves while you attend to the bird houses, as there are some avian disorders that can spread to humans through the air. So it's a good idea to protect yourself from those kinds of things by using gloves and masks. And we all have them now, so we might as well use them for other things too. Again, putting these in the bag to be shared or replanted. This has been a favorite of the butterflies all season. Roses are having some of their last blooms. I've had a few blooms on this particular rose. I guess they're over here. And at this point, usually I would deadhead or take off spent blooms. But I won't be doing that anymore because we want the rose to think, oh, it's fall and it's time to get ready for winter. So we don't want to keep it going and blooming too much longer. You always get some nice blooms in September, but then it's time for the rose to say, it's time for winter, time to go to sleep and be dormant over the winter season. So that's why I'll leave those old bloom stalks on. And often we'll get the little round red pieces, rose hips on the end of where the blossoms were, which can be decorative until the birds find them and then they consume them. A few more annuals. The cleome has been very attractive to the bees, and this one I put in just recently just to add a little color. I leave many of my plants up all winter. Some of them I will cut back, and I can start cutting back things like iris right now. They're finished for the season and I can get a jump on my fall cleaning while the days are still relatively nice, so I'm not out here when it's 30 degrees or less trying to cut things back. I don't cut everything back. I leave things like the black-eyed Susans, which are finished, but they have their seed heads, and the birds, particularly goldfinches, really love them. So we'll leave those for the goldfinches. Also, many of the pollinators that stay over the winter stay in stalks of perennial plants. So it's important not to just completely clean the whole garden out when it's gone. Leave some and do your cleaning in the spring after those ones that overwinter there have a chance to come to life and start doing their jobs. I have more asters that are going to be blooming here. Again, this is a blue one, and this is a native aster that's trying to think of the name of it. There are so many different asters, many of which are native plants, and they add a lot of color in the fall. This one again is loaded with blossoms. It's a pale blue one, but it hasn't really come out yet. This was a coreopsis, which was yellow, and I was hoping that the yellow and blue would bloom together, but I think I'm not going to be successful with that. Sedums are now pink. They start out kind of a light green, then they evolve to pink, this particular one, which is Autumn Joy, and then as fall wears on, it will become a dark burgundy red. Again, it's a colorful thing all seasons. We'll move down this way. We still have a little phlox in bloom in back and a butterfly bush. The butterfly bush has been very attractive to the dragonflies and the butterflies. Although it is not a native plant, many who do not care for it. They would rather see you plant butterfly weed or something that will sustain the caterpillars for the monarch butterflies, as well as providing some nectar for them when they're in bloom. The butterfly bush provides nectar, but it does not provide leaves that are sustaining to any of the butterflies. So there are better plants than a butterfly bush, but I enjoy its blooms, and because I didn't know that when I planted it, I will continue to keep one of them, but I won't be planting any more butterfly bush. I added again a few annual marigolds. The rabbits pruned them for me, and they're just starting to fill in, and you can see it's a bushy plant thanks to the rabbit pruning. And I used some dried blood to help keep the rabbits at bay, and they seem to be doing better. Again, this is another purple dome aster, and it has a few more blooms on it. My hummingbird house is still up, but the hummingbirds, I think, are gone. I haven't seen one for a few days. I'll leave it up until the end of the month. But they migrate fairly early, and they've headed south, most of them. You might catch a straggler, but for the most part, I believe that they have gone south. And I will be taking down the feeder and cleaning it up and storing it away for the winter. Another fall chore. Moving down this way, I do have annuals that I will be removing. And here are a few mums. There's one behind the butterfly bush, and those are perennial mums because they were planted in the spring. And they will overwinter and bloom next year. This one has been here probably 6 or 7 years. It's a white one which is just starting to show blooms. The Montauk daisies are also about ready to bloom. I have one on the other side which is just in bud, and that's a very late blooming daisy looking plant. I don't care for them as much as some of the others. I think they have a disagreeable odor to the foliage, so I have one, but not a lot of them. But they are a late bloomer, and you need all you can get in the fall to keep the blooms going. Come up this way, I have some lemongrass, and I'll be harvesting that. I like to keep some of the lemongrass in my freezer to be used during the winter. You use the base of the plant in some of the Thai dishes, and it is a tender plant. I have dug them also and brought them in for the winter. Depending on space in my indoor area, I may do that again this year. This is a daylily that wasn't cut back, and as you can see, it's getting kind of straggly, so that will probably get cut back fairly soon. This is another plant of interest for fall, and it's a native one, and it is ironweed, and it has a pretty blue bloom. Again, these are just starting to come out, and it's fairly tall. There are taller ones and shorter ones, but it's quite an attractive plant that stands up nice and straight and adds a lot to the fall garden. It grows pretty well from seed as well, but it is a perennial. Coming down this way, here's another purple dome aster, and this one has a few more blooms in back. It also has quite a few honeybees on it. So I don't have bees, but someone nearby certainly does, because I see a lot of them in my flower garden. This daylily was cut back. It's a Happy Returns, and that is one that reblooms, and I cut it back, and I've been sure to cut off all the spent bloomscapes, and again, it is starting to bloom again. So it adds a little more color to the garden. Another rose that is some of the last blooms of summer. And of course, ornamental grasses, which add some color. I have over here my lemon verbena plant, which has really enjoyed the rain this year. It's surrounded by some zinnias that I've transplanted from the garden. Those are annuals, they'll go. And this one I need to harvest before it frosts. I haven't had good luck growing starts of this from cuttings, but harvesting it and drying it gives a very nice lemon-scented herb to be used throughout the winter. Again, the perennial garden is on its way out. but there's plenty to enjoy for at least another month until we get a hard frost. At that time, things will suddenly disappear, turn brown. Things like these will just completely flop and turn brown and will need to be removed. But we can worry about that next month. Now let's move over to the vegetable garden. And before we get there, you may think this is a pumpkin. Actually, I grow round zucchini. It's a zucchini variety called 8-ball, and one always gets away from me. And if you have one that gets away from you, that is overgrown, which this one is, they will turn orange. So I have tended to use them as pumpkins, pumpkin replacements. Again, I will not use the flesh of this. It's strictly decorative at this point, and once it goes, it will go to the compost. But it's kind of interesting that they do turn this lovely shade of orange and can be quite decorative. Now let's head down to the vegetable garden. The vegetable garden has become a small jungle. I've taken out some plants that were finished for the season, but there's still plenty left. My basil is looking a little sad, but there's still enough to be picked for a meal here and there. The lemon basil is going to seed, but again, I can pick that and use it. I have the flowers that I planted from seed that have been enjoyed all season. This is a cosmos, and it's a new one called Pink Lemonade. And at first I didn't think it was going to do much, but now as fall is approaching, it's really become a very pretty flower, and it's nice to pick too. I think I'll probably save a few seeds of this one and see if I can grow a little more next year. Though being a hybrid, it may not come true to seed. I still am getting broccoli. The main heads of the broccoli have been harvested, but I'm getting some small, I don't know if we can see it or not, but there are small heads that are forming on the plants, and this will continue all the way into November. Some of the best broccoli is harvested after it frosts a little bit because that kills all the insects that may inhabit it. My tomatoes have not been great this year. I have been disappointed in them. I'm still getting some tomatoes, but the foliage has been terrible. All of the rain has not been helpful, but I'm able to pick enough for our own use, though not enough to do any making of sauce or other canning. So this year I will be buying my sauce instead of putting it up myself. I'm still getting beans, green beans and yellow beans. These plants just won't stop bearing, and I'm getting plenty of beans along the way. I can come out about every third day and pick enough for a meal. It's amazing. I have never had beans that continued as long as these have. I have plenty of kale, a few peppers. I don't do too well with peppers usually, or eggplant, but again, I get a few of each. And there is a nice eggplant in here starting to grow, and a few peppers along the way. Some carrots over here, perpetual spinach, and flowers again. I will know when we've had a hard frost when I come out and find these nasturtiums completely withered and gone and just flat on the ground. The nasturtiums are in bright yellow-orange colors. They really have been doing well with all the rain this spring, as have the cucumbers. And I'm sure I can see a few cucumbers to be picked over there right now. I grow them on trellises. I have one of slicing cucumbers and another trellis over here of pickling cucumbers. And I've been making pickles this year. So if we don't have tomato sauce, we'll have plenty of pickles at any rate. Lots of kale, both the red kale and green kale. We like kale. I'll be using that today in the cooking segment. And flowers, which I enjoy picking and bringing in the house for a nice bouquet. On the other side of the garden, I have some arugula that I planted, a second crop. The squash that's still bearing occasionally. We're pretty tired of zucchini and summer squash at this point, so I really don't mind if it stops bearing anytime soon. We've had enough for the season, as it happens. I also planted some new lettuce, which you can barely see behind the zinnia plants, which have gotten really tall. And we can continue to use that for salads, along with the spinach, the perpetual spinach. The perpetual spinach is a very mild beet relative that you use the foliage, but it doesn't taste like beet greens. It's very mild and tastes more like spinach. And it will do better in my garden for a longer season than spinach, which doesn't care for hot weather. And we've had a lot of hot weather this summer too. Coming back over here, this is one plant of tomatillos. And I'm going to be making some tomatillo salsa today. And tomatillos are a funny plant that has a funny little bloom, or it looks like a hot air balloon, upside down hot air balloon, I guess. And these little balloons start out hollow, and then they fill with the fruit of the tomatillo. I never knew I could grow tomatillos here until quite recently. And the first year I grew them, I planted 6 plants. Big mistake, because each plant grows extremely well and has lots of fruit. So now I grow 1 plant and I have plenty. They also freeze pretty well. You just husk them and freeze them, which we'll talk about a little more later. Down here below I have a few hot peppers, and those too will freeze. All you have to do is put them in the freezer, wash them of course. And if you wish, you can seed them. I tend to prefer the hot peppers seeded. They aren't quite as hot without the seeds. And they will do just fine. Green peppers can also be frozen just by putting them in the freezer, usually cutting them and taking out but they don't need any other care. They don't need to be blanched. They can just be frozen as is, which is a big time saver. And they're nice to have in the winter. They won't be as crisp as they would be in a salad, but you can certainly use them in cooked dishes. Again, beyond the flowers are the strawberry plants that I planted in the spring, and they are doing really well. They've added runners, and I think we'll have a nice strawberry harvest next year. I'm looking forward to that. I'll be putting some fresh straw on that to insulate them a bit over the winter, but certainly not before we have a frost. So a lot of things are just on hold in the garden. We keep picking and eating and picking flowers. This is one called, I'll think of it in a minute. It's an interesting little flower at any rate. And it has little red seeds that can be put in an arrangement, and they can be dried. So it grows easily from seed, and it also grows from cuttings. It's kind of a succulent. So we've enjoyed those, and we'll continue to enjoy them as I pick them and bring them in to be saved for the winter and used in some arrangements. They add just some airiness to an arrangement. Over on the other side, we have dahlias, and I planted those in the spring, and I'm going to move over that way. These have gotten really tall. Again, I often neglect to water them, but they've been wonderful to pick. Again, once frost comes, these will turn brown, and I will dig these later on, probably next month, and bring the tubers inside to be kept over the winter. They are a tender plant. They will not survive the winter here unless global warming really intensifies. I will have to bring the dahlias in. I also have some other bulbs that I will be bringing in. I have some lilies that will come in, and again, the bulbs, they've been out here for the winter, and they'll come in for the winter, or out here for the summer, where their foliage can grow and the bulb can be enriched, and then I'll bring them in for the winter and plant them out in pots, which we'll enjoy probably about February when we have the blooms inside the house. But the dahlias this year, as I said, have really been nice. One thing you can do with dahlias, because they're an annual, is you can continue to deadhead these. Any spent blooms should be taken off, and that will encourage new blooms to form. And we have plenty of buds, so we should have a really good show, and I've been enjoying picking these to bring inside, as well as the zinnias. The zinnias have been great favorites of the monarch butterflies for nectar, and I one day saw 5 monarchs out here. I was hoping we'd see one today. Again, the monarchs are going to be starting their trek south soon. We do have the white cabbage moths, which are always a problem with the kale and broccoli and cabbage plants. I use a little Captain Jack's organic spray on those crops only, and that's the only spraying I do in the garden. But I do like my broccoli, and I do not like wormy broccoli, so that's one thing I will spray when it needs it, when it's forming the heads. Again, I was hoping we'd see a monarch today, but I guess not today. It's been a good year in the garden, and in making plans for next year, I can't see much that I would change, except I will rotate the crops so that I don't have anything planted in the same place twice. That's why I make a little map of the garden each year, to try to keep things moving. It's a little hard when you don't have a lot of space and you've been gardening a long time to give it a rotation, but it does need to be done for the health of the plants. They'll be much healthier if you can move them around a little bit. So we'll be doing that next year. Of course, the raspberries and the strawberries are pretty static. They can't be moved because they're perennials, as well as the rhubarb. But in between that, we can move the tomatoes maybe down to this area, and the cabbage and broccoli up there, and more lettuce down the other way, and maybe my tomatillo plant will go up in here. So I will be busy this winter planning out just how I'm going to change this around for next year's garden. Again, also counting on things that need to be different. I need to support the dahlias a little better. Some of these are kind of lagging down into the fence area. I did put some tomato cages on them a little late. I think I need bigger tomato cages on these particular dahlias. They have been really pretty. I have a little wild garden behind the dahlias, and also a few tomato plants back there that surprisingly did a little better. They were extras that I just kind of put in there on their plum tomatoes, and they've done okay. I have plenty of milkweed out here for the butterflies, and maybe that's why I've seen so many monarchs this year. I've tried to keep this with butterfly-friendly plants, and they do like the tall verbena as well, which is the purple plant that you see there. And the milkweeds, both swamp milkweed and the regular milkweed, which can be a little invasive at times, but if you don't like the invasive tendencies of just the plain milkweed, the swamp milkweed doesn't really require a swamp, and it does tend to stay put a little better. Now let's see what we can do out at the cutting table. I take a lot of cuttings from my fall garden to grow on these plants inside. It saves me a lot of money in the spring when I put out some planters. This planter was, except for one plant, entirely from cuttings that I took last fall. And this is the plant that's the new one, which is the reddish one. And again, I will be taking some cuttings of that. And I'm going to snip the cuttings below a leaf joint. And I usually take quite a few. And then if they don't do, why, I can take some more. And I take it shortly below the leaf joint. And we'll take one of these guys too. And then we'll come over here to the cutting table that I've set up, and I have put compost or potting soil in each of these containers, and I've used a well-draining base for these at this point. And each of the cuttings I'm going to remove the lower leaves. And here was my leaf joint. And I'm going to use some rooting powder. Although with coleus, which is this plant which grows so well in the shade for me, I don't necessarily need to do that. But I'm going to tap it in this rooting powder. And you notice I poured out the rooting powder into a container. This will not be returned to the main container. What I don't use, I will discard so it doesn't contaminate the. And then using a pencil, I make a little hole for it and fasten it in tightly. And I will be taking off these lower leaves. And when I get them all planted, I usually plant each variety separately. Again, all you need is a few leaves. And I do usually 3 in each pot. Now, when they root, and you generally lose a few. In fact, it's worth trying on some things to see if they'll root, because you don't necessarily know whether they will or not. Some plants do and some plants don't. But we'll try this new red one in another box. And again, use the pencil to make a hole. And I have another one here. And again, by removing at least some of the leaves, they tend to root a little better, and they will make good leaves. But once they've rooted, I will move some of the plants, repot them in potting soil, because it'll generally be winter by then. I take them inside when frost is threatening, because they're all tender annuals. And at that point, I will repot them so that they each have an individual pot. And then come spring, they probably will be a little leggy, but I'll plant them out in the planters. And they won't be much for a while. But by the end of maybe July, you'll have a whole planter full of seedlings. Not only coleus can you do this with, but I'm coming over here to pick out some of the plectranthus, and I have several different kinds of plectranthus. And you just take the growing tips, again, and then there's this plectranthus that's blue flowering in the fall, and that also roots easily. And we'll take some of that too. Theoretically, we would like to take some pieces of that don't have blooms right now, so I'll have to do a little digging inside here to get some of that out and remove any bloomscapes. And again, under that leaf joint, that's where the new roots will form. And add it. I'll probably do 2 trays full of various cuttings. I often try different herbs and other things, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. You really don't have a whole lot to lose with it. If you don't get it to root, you can compost it. But surprisingly, a lot of them do root, and root well, and provide good-sized plants. You will need to do some pruning of the plants as they grow, pinching them out as you would normally pinch out the plants that were growing so that they become bushy and full. And I think I have 5 different kinds of coleus now. I buy 1 new plant each year of a different design instead of buying lots of new plants. These will go under the plant lights inside once they've rooted out here. But as I take them in, they'll go under lights for approximately 12 hours a day. Let's see, this is another one like that, so we'll stick it in there. And then I'm going to give them a nice drink once they're all in there, and keep them watered well. It's one reason I do it up here near the house. I see them and water them. If I did it farther away from the house, I might not see them enough to keep them watered well. So we'll let those go and we'll check on them again next month and see how they're doing. And there'll be a lot more of them by then because I'm going to take a number more cuttings of different things to see how they will grow. If we can turn around a little bit, I have a plant over here that I grew from cuttings. It's a house plant, and it's this one. And I grew this from 4 cuttings that I put in last year, and it's grown into a whole new house plant. So you can do that with many of the house plants. It's always worth a try. And you may be able to fill some of your containers by things that you root yourself. It's rather rewarding to see them grow. Here's another one that likes to root, and that is the purple dragon plant that adds a lot of nice color. And again, we'll pop that one in a container. It's just fun to try different ones. This one I think would root anywhere. A lot of people like to use water to root plants. I seem to do better with soil for the types of things I root. Geraniums work extremely well, both the scented geraniums and just regular blooming geraniums. You can keep those as plants, but sometimes they get very woody. So if you bring a geranium inside, it'll get woody at the base. So it's nice to take fresh cuttings, and then you can have new plants, new geraniums this way without having to buy all the geraniums the next year. I've filled most of my planters with cuttings the last 2 years, and will continue to do so, probably in the future. Now let's go back by the shade garden and pond. Many of the hostas down here in the shade garden and other things are starting to look a little tired, so I can go in and some of them have been attacked by slugs again with the summer wetness. That has been a problem. I still have a few good leaves on this plant, which I'll leave, but I'm going to start taking off some of the leaves that aren't as nice and composting them or trashing them. If you have plants that are diseased, it's best to put them in the trash and not. These are not necessarily diseased, they've just been eaten by slugs, but if you have a plant that's generally diseased, you don't want to compost it. The tomato plants will probably go in the trash for that reason, because they do have some sort of fungal disease, blight or something of that nature. But these hosta just are tired and aging out, so we'll just cut off some of the leaves and trash those. The thing I like about the hellebores is they stay perky all year. They'll last into the summer, and they just stay perky. The ferns will just kind of dissolve into the ground when they get frosted, but these will stay here and be green all winter long. And it's nice to have something at least that's a little green all year down here in the shade. Now let's go back to the fish pond and see how they're doing. This is a plant called turtle head, and you can see the blooms look a little like a turtle's head and mouth if you squeeze them. It's kind of an interesting plant, and it happens to be a native. Actually, it's the white form that's native to Massachusetts. I bought what I thought was a white form, and it turned out to be the pink form, but I still like it, and it has spread around. I planted it about a foot from there, and now it's over here, so we'll see where it goes in the future. It evidently likes to travel a little bit. It likes a wet, shady area, and that's what we have here. So it should be happy, and I hope it lasts a few more years, and maybe a few more pieces will come up as time goes by. Fish are still doing good, and they should be up to have some chow, maybe, unless they got fed earlier. My husband tends to throw a handful in every once in a while, so they may not decide it's time to eat. But they are in there. I still have my 6 fish that I've had for several years, and the fake heron has been successful so far in keeping the real heron from eating them. as a decoy. The elephant ear plants that I held over from last year barely made it through the winter inside. They looked really bad. But as you can see, with a little fertilizer and a little water, they have come back beautifully. In fact, I even bought an extra one, wondering if I was going to have any at all. So now I have 4 instead of 3. And they will all come in for the winter. And again, probably barely make it through the winter before I can put them out once the temperatures have risen considerably next year. The begonia behind them will also come in. I started a new one from cuttings of that as well, so I have to decide what I can bring in and what I can't. Space becomes limiting when you're bringing in plants. I do not bring in the impatiens. They will go along with the frost. They start very easily from seed in the spring, so there's no need really to try to make them last over the winter. I have a net ready and an old expandable sprinkler frame that I will put in the pool to hold the net up out of the water, and the net will keep the leaves out of the pond. I've had trouble with leaves coming in. The leaves are starting to come down, so as soon as I get the elephant ears out of the pond, I will net the pond, and that will keep the leaves out. When you have a pond that's surrounded by trees, leaves are always a problem. And rather than draining the pond each spring, which is a difficult job and one I don't enjoy doing, I'll net it now and keep a lot of the leaves out. It also keeps the pond a little neater and smelling a little fresher if they doesn't have rotting leaves all over the bottom of it. The fish will stay in the pond all winter. An ice melter will go in at the appropriate time when it starts to freeze. And within another month, I will put the thermometer in and hook it to the side of the pond and check the water temperature. Once the temperature goes below 50 in the water, and the water will stay warmer longer. It's a dark bottom which absorbs the sun. But once it goes below 50, I will start using what they call spring and fall fish food. It's an easier digested food. The fish metabolism changes with the temperature of the water, so they need something spring and fall, excuse me, that's a little gentler on their system. Once it gets down to 40 degrees, it's time to just stop feeding altogether, and they go into kind of a suspended animation for the winter. Excuse me. The onions that I pulled last month have been in the shed where it's dry and sunny through the window on the side, are now ready to be bagged up, and I'll put these in a bag. They aren't really big, but they started out as onions, little onion sets, most of which were used as scallions. But what's left made onions that can be used. These are a nice size to put in my beef stew or something like that. And I'll just put them in the bag, and then I hang them in the garage near the back door where they don't freeze, but they stay pretty cool, and they'll be ready to go. We did the same thing with the garlic, and that was harvested last month, and again, it's in the same spot in the garage, and I've been using that regularly. The shed will be cleaned and repurposed for the fall. I need to put some of my patio furniture in it, and we'll be getting out the baskets that I use to cover my perennials out in the garden. Some of the more tender ones, the lavenders and the chrysanthemums. And they will be filled with oak leaves and put over the tender plants that I want to save. Again, cleanup of most of the areas will wait until spring. I will cut back hostas once they are completely gone, because the slugs like to hide in that foliage as it lays there on the ground. So those will be cleaned up nicely, but some of the other things will get to stay. The ferns, again, are no problem. They just kind of melt, so they don't need to be cut. I'll take some cuttings of this particular coleus and see if we can get some more to grow for next year. I have a nice little fuchsia here that I will probably pot up and attempt to bring in. Some years I have luck with it and some years I don't. But it's always worth it if you have the space to try a few things, and by Christmas you'll know whether they're going to make it or whether they're not going to make it. Now let's go up to the patio and do some cooking with some of the things from the garden. It's football season and we're football fans, so today I'm going to do a little tailgate, and it's actually going to also be my supper tonight, even though there isn't a football game. But these are some things that you might want to consider making, and they're in variations. And the first one is salsa in chips, and I'm using those tomatillos to make a salsa verde, or the green salsa that you see in cans in the supermarket, and they're really tomatillos. So I bought my food processor outside, and the tomatillo, you saw them on the bush, or plant. I guess it's almost a bush now. And you can see they have a husk covering. I think they're also called husk tomatoes. They look like a little like a green tomato, and they have this husk on them, and when they're ripe the husk splits. And there you have the tomatillos. And they can be pale green, or if you peel them yourself and take them off the plant when you think it's going to frost, they can be a little brighter green, but they're all edible. And the tomatillo is a little sticky when it comes out of the pod, so I wash them well. And then for the salsa, I used a pound of tomatillos, half of an onion, which I cut in quarters and it kind of fell apart, and a couple hot peppers. And I have jalapenos that I grow along the side of my house where they get a lot of sun. And so I have been harvesting my tomatillos, or my jalapenos too, to go with the tomatillos. And I'm going to put all this into the food processor, neatly we hope. And what I had done is put it under the broiler for 7 minutes to broil it, to get them a little brown. You can see they have some brown spots on them, a little. And then I turned the temperature to 400 degrees and left them in another 7 minutes. So 14 minutes in all for the tomatillos. And then I'm going to add to that 2 cloves of garlic, again, some that we harvested. So far, most of this has come from my garden. And a half cup of cilantro. Now, if you don't like cilantro, and there are people who do not, it just doesn't taste right to them, and you could use parsley instead. We like the cilantro, we both enjoy it, so we use it, and I grow it. So now I'm going to just spin this around. And you can leave it as fine or as chunky as you like, and that's it. We have salsa. I like it a little chunky, so we're going to pour that in a little bowl for serving. And my table is decidedly moving. And I'll use this to get the rest out. And I'm going to serve this with chips. You can also use the same mixture and make some very nice chicken enchiladas, or tomatillo chicken if you like the green salsa. There are other recipes as well. If you go on to various websites, you'll find a number of salsa recipes using the tomatillos. I'll put a spoon in it for people to serve themselves. And we have that with chips, so that's our first course. Actually, all of these foods are kind of first courses if you want to think about it. And the next thing I'm going to make are chicken wings. And you can either buy the wings, the drummers as they call them, or you can make your own. And I started with, in this bag, 3 chicken wings, which I cut the tips off. And I saved those tips to make chicken broth, or to put in a broth for soup in the winter. I just stuck them in the freezer, wing tips, And then I cut each wing into 2 pieces so that we have the little drummers. Or you could buy them already cut if you want to pay the extra. And I want to marinate these for several hours. And this recipe was given to me by a friend. And it's one of the easiest chicken wing recipes, and it's one of the best. I really do like it. And we're going to start out by adding, for 2 pounds of chicken wings, you would use 5 ounces of soy sauce. This is about a half a pound, or about a pound. And so I'm using half. And 1/4 cup of brown sugar. That would, again, for 2 pounds of wings. And for 2 pounds, you would use a half teaspoon of garlic powder. Not garlic salt, but garlic powder. It's quite a bit stronger. And it does give them a little zing. I'm going to stir that around in my measuring cup. And then I'm just going to pour it in the bag with the wings that I've prepared. I'm going to marinate these for 2 hours at least. You can marinate them longer if you wish. If you are in the refrigerator for something else, just give them a turn every once in a while until they're marinated. And then you'll use a foil-covered pan, and I'm really emphasizing foil-covered. Because if you don't, you're going to spend a lot of time scrubbing the pan. Otherwise, you can wad up the foil and put it in the trash. These really, because of the brown sugar as much as anything, they get a very sticky mixture on the bottom of the pan. So if you use the foil, they're quick and easy. If you don't, you have a scrubbing job. So put foil in the pan, and then we're going to put the marinated wings in it at 350 for about an hour. And again, turning them occasionally, and put everything in, marinade and all. Just pour it all in the pan and cook it at 350 with no cover on a baking pan for about an hour. And what you will come out with are some nicely glazed chicken wings, ready to serve at your tailgate. And the next thing I'm going to make are potato skins. And I've already done the skins. I baked 2 potatoes in this case, although you can bake as many as you'd like. I have several recipes for potato skins. Sometimes I just keep them simple with potato filling and a little onion and cheese. These I wanted to have a little more meal quality too. So I'm going to use some of the potato that I took out of the skins. I'm not using all of it, only about a half a cup. The original recipe called for garbanzo beans, and they put it all in the processor. But I decided I wanted to use potatoes instead. And then I'm going to add kale that I've run through the processor to make it very finely cut. Now when you cook kale, it's going to shrink a great deal, but I need something that's going to hold it together. So I'm going to use some sour cream in the kale and potatoes. And I need a spatula to do this, to bind it together. About a 1/4 cup of sour cream. Again, this recipe is not anything that's set. It's kind of what you have. But I decided to use kale, and we'll stir that. The shells are made ahead. After I baked the potatoes, I took out the potato filling, the middle, leaving a little shell. And then I brushed them with a mixture of oil and butter, melted butter. Put them back in the oven so that the shells got nice and crispy. Okay, I'm going to stir that part around. So this will be our vegetable too. And And we'll add some things to make it really taste good too. That being a little Parmesan cheese, some chopped shallots, and some cooked bacon. It's been a couple pieces of bacon that have been cooked until it's crisp. I'm going to use this to stuff these potato skins, hopefully as neatly as I can here. And let's find another spoon. Kind of get it off. And I've put this on a pan that can go in the oven because these are going to need to go in the oven before they're served for maybe 15-20 minutes to cook the kale and blend everything together. I'm calling these potato skins, but they're actually more like a stuffed potato, I guess. If you want a thinner skin, just don't put as much filling in. And I'm going to use it all, I think. If you wanted to make this vegetarian, lacto-vegetarian, because I did use cheese, unless you use vegan cheese. But you could make them leave the bacon out. However, bacon is very good in them. I want to get most of it into the shell. And then I'm going to put some cheese on top. And I am going to use my fingers for this. They are going into the oven, so they will be cooked. And this is just cheddar cheese. And when we cook this, of course, the cheese will melt, and it will be all melty and good. Again, you can add other things to this if you wanted. You could add pumpkin seeds, almonds, spinach. You could use spinach instead of kale, definitely. And then I'll sprinkle a little parsley on too, just to stay with our green theme. These will go in the oven again for about 15 minutes. You might be able to wrap the pan in foil and put it on the grill, or if you have a grill pan, or wrap the skins in foil and put it right on the grill if you wanted to. And I'll put a little garnish on this once they come out of the oven. This would not be done earlier, but we've got cherry tomatoes and parsley from the garden, so we might as well use it as a garnish. So those would be the potato skins. And we'll put those over in that way. And chicken wings. And then we need a nice dessert. And for that, I made a, and am I missing something? Nope, it's right here. This is a apple pizza. You gotta have pizza at a tailgate party, but this one's an apple pizza. And what it is one pie crust, and it can either be homemade or purchased. Put in a pizza pan with some apples on top, probably about a half an apple pie's worth. I used 4 apples for this, cut them in slices, added some sugar, 3 tablespoons of flour, and a little cinnamon, and put those around the crust. Then I made a streusel topping with a 1/4 cup of butter, 1/2 cup of flour, a 1/4 cup of oatmeal, and brown sugar, 1/4 cup of brown sugar, and mixed those to crumbs, and then put that on top of the apples and baked it again at 350. Everything here bakes at 350 for about 35 minutes. Once it's done, you can use some caramelized cream sauce to excuse me, drizzle on top. You can serve it with ice cream. So this would be a caramel apple pizza, I guess. Sauce was in the refrigerator, so it's a little thick. This is just caramelized cream sauce. So that's our tailgate dinner for today of salsa, chicken wings, stuffed potatoes or potato skins, and an apple pizza for dessert. Thank you for joining me today. I'm Liz Davey, and you've been watching A Walk in the Garden on NCTV, Norfolk's community cable station.